Hey, boys and girls, it's time to journey with Odysseus to the land of the dead. Woo, creepy. Here we go. Chapter 1 Island of the Cannibal Giants. For days, Odysseus, king of the Greek island of Ithaca, rode with his warriors over the calm sea. As he rode, Odysseus felt great pity for his men. He knew they grieved for their comrades murdered by the one-eyed monster, the Cyclops. He knew also that they felt terrible guilt, for their foolish actions had made the wind god angry, and now there was no wind to fill the sails of the 12 Greek ships. Odysseus shared the despair of his men, but he fought his grief with a single vision, the vision of home. Before they had angered the wind god, the Greeks had sailed close to Ithaca. For the first time in 10 years, Odysseus had seen the rocky shores of his island, its green woods, and the smoke of its hearth fires. He'd imagined his wife, Penelope, cooking dinner for his aged parents and his young son, Telemachus. Now, with Ithaca and his beloved family ever in mind, Odysseus rode. For 6 days and 6 nights, without the help of a single breeze, he and his men rowed without stopping. Oh, can you even imagine that? Rowing a boat for 6 days and 6 nights? It's intense. On the 7th day, the Greeks came upon a mysterious island. They steered their ships toward a cove surrounded by a steep wall of cliffs, making it a natural harbor. The Greeks sailed into the harbor through a narrow passage. They tied their ships together near the shore. Though the waters were calm and peaceful, Odysseus felt a strange foreboding. He ordered the crew of his own ship not to moor their vessel with the others, but to anchor it near the mouth of the cove. When the Greeks had gone ashore, Odysseus climbed a rock to look out over the strange land. He saw the smoke of a fire rising in the distance. Who lives here, he wondered. Now, Odysseus has to be kind of afraid of this, right? After his last experience with the Cyclops? I'd be scared. He quickly returned to his men and ordered 3 of them to climb over the cliffs and explore the land. Find out who lives here, he said. Tell them we wish them no harm. The 3 scouts set out at once. Odysseus and the others waited on the rocky shore for their return. The men had not been gone long when horrible screams filled the air. 2 of the scouts charged down the side of the mountain. Shrieking and waving their arms, they appeared to have gone mad. "What has happened?" Odysseus shouted. In trembling voices, the men told their terrible tale. "We met a girl at a spring. She invited us to go with her," one said. "When we entered her house, her mother appeared, a hideous giantess." That's a lady giant, a giantess. "Tall as a mountain," cried the other. "She sent for her husband, another giant, a cannibal." The men broke down, sobbing. They told how the cannibal giant had snatched up their friend and eaten him before their very eyes. A roar then shook the harbor like thunder. Odysseus looked up and saw a legion of giants standing at the top of the cliffs. The bloodthirsty cannibals began picking up huge rocks. They hurled them down the mountainside. "Board the ships!" Odysseus called to his men. "Set sail at once!" As the other Greeks scrambled onto their ships, Odysseus and his crew ran toward the mouth of the cove where Odysseus's black ship was moored. The rest of the fleet was doomed. The giants hurled their rocks down upon the ships docked in the harbor. The rocks smashed the vessels to splinters and crushed many of the sailors to death. As the Greeks screamed in agony, the cannibals raced down to the shore and speared men as if they were catching fish for supper. Ugh. Watching with rage and horror, Odysseus knew he could save only the men aboard his own ship. He drew his sword and slashed the anchor rope. "Row! Row with all your might!" he shouted to his men. "Row for your lives!" As the screams and cries of their comrades filled the air, Odysseus and his crew frantically rowed away from the cove. of the cannibal giants. What could possibly come next? A gift from the gods. You think it will be a good gift or a bad gift? I don't know. Let's find out. Odysseus and his men rowed until their ship was finally safe upon the seas. As Odysseus stared at the wine-dark waves, the screams of the dying men still rang in his ears. He realized the curse of the Cyclops was coming true. He remembered the cruel words of the hideous monster. May Odysseus never reach his home alive. May he lose his way, his ships, and all his men. May he find only sorrow and trouble on his journey. Odysseus had lost nearly all his ships now, and he had lost nearly all his men. 11 vessels had been destroyed by the cannibal giants. All but 45 of his warriors had been slain. Stunned by their losses, Odysseus and his crew could not speak. They sailed on in silence, shaken by the memory of the giants spearing the helpless wounded. Finally, the black ship came upon an island covered with thickets and dense woods. The Greeks climbed ashore and collapsed on the rocky beach. For 2 days and 2 nights, Odysseus and his men lay on the hard ground, mourning their lost comrades. On the 3rd day, when rosy dawn crept over the island, Odysseus gathered his strength and stood up. He did not wake his crew, for he knew they had lost all heart. They are too stricken with grief to hunt for food, he thought. Soon they will be too weak to sail, and they will die on this island. Desperate to save his men, Odysseus picked up his sword and spear. Then he set out in search of game. So Odysseus's men are so sad, struck with grief, that means extreme sadness over a loss, that they can't even get up to hunt. But Odysseus, who also is sad, he's also lost his men, his friends. He does it. What word can we use to describe Odysseus? Let's see what effects it has. Odysseus climbed a craggy hill and looked about for signs of life. In the distance, he saw smoke rising from the green forest. It curled above the trees and drifted into the sky. Did more giants and monsters live on this shore? Odysseus wondered anxiously. Or might the inhabitants be welcoming and kind? Before Odysseus could answer these questions, he knew he must find food for his men. The gods seemed to hear Odysseus' thoughts, for just then, from out of the trees walked a giant stag with towering antlers. Odysseus hurled his spear, killing the stag at once. He then fashioned a rope from willow twigs and tied the legs of the stag together. He hoisted the stag onto his shoulders and carried it back to the Greek camp. Odysseus found his men huddled in a circle, their cloaks wrapped around their heads. Still deep in mourning, they wept bitter tears for their fallen shipmates. They trembled for their own fate as well. Listen, my friends, said Odysseus. You and I shall not go down to the land of the dead this morning. It is not our day to die. Until that day comes, we must take care of ourselves. Rise, be well. Let us feast on this gift from the gods. The men uncovered their heads. They admired the mighty stag Odysseus had slain for them, and slowly they began preparing for their feast. They washed their hands and faces in the sea. After many days of grief and suffering, their hearts began to mend. Let's think about that word that we could use to describe Odysseus. I'll see you tomorrow when we'll read about the witch's spell. Go to the next slide and answer that question.